And yeah, maybe. Like the fake Midwest.
Must be great to be like Wolverine, the best there is at what you do.
Well, there's that. There's also the man who saved Marvel Comics one more time.
I had help.
You had help, you had fantastic people, but as I always say, whether we're here, whether we're there, whether we're anywhere, it takes someone at the top to lead. And that's always going to be you, and you should always take credit for that.
Well, thank you. I did get a really good group together. We understood the mission and we got it done.
So, Jim, I'm always actually prepped, right? I always have questions for everybody. I do research. The thing is that you and I've done this with you, and I think more than anyone else. Yeah. And there are certain stories I like to hear, and there's certain stories that I was like, oh, we've had a few drinks, and you've told me something I didn't know about, and I'm not going to tell you about it here. I'm just looking at you all, and this is the one good thing about my job, but one of the many. So, I don't know, what is a question that do you ever get sick of answering over and over? Because I don't think I've ever asked you that. Because I get sick of answering questions, and I'm not the person who...
If somebody wants to know something and don't happen to know it, I'm happy to tell them. I don't care how many other people I've told.
Really?
Yeah.
So there's not one?
No.
No subject, no anything. Is there one that you particularly like telling?
Well, it's always interesting if somebody comes up with, a new question. That's always fun.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I thought I would start off with that. So who has a question ready to go? If not, I do. Oh, man. Come on.
He's going to get us... Oh, there we go.
I don't know what. Take your time, bud.
You're good.
Sorry, I just...
It's all right.
But, I guess the main thing I want to ask you about is the Legion of Superheroes and your work with them, and what you think they represent as a team.
All right, he asked me about the Legion of Superheroes, what they are, what makes them as good as a team. To me, when I was trying to get started in comics, I discovered these newfangled Marvel comics, and they were really good. And some of the DCs I felt didn't live up to their potential, and in particular, Legion of Superheroes. Young superheroes in the future just seemed to me like, wow. But I never really got, I liked the covers of the books, but I never was really thrilled by the story. So that's why I picked Legion of Superheroes to be my first target, my first submissions. And, like I said, I tried to sort of learn from the comics that I liked and also the comics that was bad. Why are these good and why are these bad? Why do I like these and I don't like those? And I tried to figure that out, and I also tried to apply all that to the first story I wrote, which is the Legion of Superheroes. And sent it in, got a letter back from the editor saying, send me another one. All right, I sent him two more, two-part story. And then he called me up and he said, we're gonna buy these and publish them, and I wanna start using you as a regular writer. And I guess I should have been surprised. Everybody was surprised but me, because that's what I meant to do. That's what I was trying to do. So yeah, I meant that. And then that's how I got started. But that's the reason I picked the Legion, is because think of the potential. You get the future. You can, there's a lot of ways to use that, technology and everything. You've got these characters all from different planets. They all have something special about them. I just thought that was, man, what a playground full of toys. Anyway.
But for people who don't know, tell them how old you were.
I was 13 when I wrote my first 3 stories, and like I said, they bought them and they published them.
And they did not know you were 13.
No, I live 400 miles away in Pittsburgh, so this was all over the phone or by mail. And so I came to understand that the editor thought I was a college student. I think at some point I actually mentioned how old I was. I don't know if he heard me or he just spaced it or whatever, but at one point he asked me how old I was. And I said, well, I just turned 14. He said, put your mother on the phone. So, and my mother had to come with me on my first business trip to New York, which is kind of dorky, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah. Next question?
Yeah, you followed up with that.
Oh, okay.
I was wondering what the editor's reaction was when you found out you were 14. Did that like put a kink in the plan to start publishing you?
No, they were already committed. I think they probably already published the first story by then, but the first couple actually. And no, I mean, when I came to New York on my first business trip, because what he wanted me to do was fly to New York, check into a hotel, come to the office every day for a week. He said, "We'll pay for everything," and and then, like I said, I'm on the phone with him, and I'm thinking, like, how's that going to go, And I think it's because I hesitated that he asked me how old I was. All right, so he talked to my mother. My mother was on board. My family needed the money, and so okay, so I went on my first business trip with Mom, and so. When I got there, his instructions to me were, when you get to your hotel room, call me. And I'm thinking, why? This hotel is directly across the street from DC Comics. I said, well, I could just come there. He said, no, you stay there. I'll come and get you. Okay, so sure enough, a little while there's a knock on the door, and I open the door, and he's looking at my tie pin. And he looks like this. He says, you'll do. I had a jacket on and a tie, and because in those days that's what you did. If anything business, or even if you just flew on a plane, you dressed appropriately because people have to look at you, so you might as well try to look all right. So I was properly dressed, and I was a bit taller than him, and so. What he told me what he was afraid of. He was afraid I'd be like some cute little red-haired kid with freckles and a Charlie Brown t-shirt, and that if I came to the office like that, he'd be embarrassed. DC had a rule. You could not enter the office unless you had a jacket and a tie. They wouldn't let you in. And so that policy persisted, by the way, from before I started. I started my first visit to the office was actually 66, so I started in 65. That policy persisted at least until 1977. And Marvel, he dressed to paint a house, didn't matter, nobody cared. In fact, it was almost the opposite. It was almost like that was the uniform. That's what you were supposed to dress like at Marvel. At DC, though, jacket and tie. And then in 1977, Cary Bates and Marty Pasco decided to test the waters. And they went to DC's offices with a jacket and an open collar, just like this. And they were allowed in. I'm telling you, phones ringing all over the industry. Bates and Pasco got in without ties. It was a big deal. And if you've ever seen a photograph of Neil Adams wearing a tie, that picture was taken in the DC offices, I guarantee you. Okay? Because he had to wear a jacket and a tie. Anyway, I passed the stuffiness test, and I got to go in and spent the week there learning things. And my mother walked around New York and looked at tourist stuff, I guess.
Can you real quick talk a little bit about your mother and the influence? I love the story about her buying a thesaurus and just sort of when you learned how to read, it's like, here, figure it out.
No, when my mother taught me to read, this is common. A lot of people tell the same story, but with me it's true. When I was well before first grade, she would read comic books to me, and she'd point at the words. She'd read very slowly and point at the words. And after a while, I didn't need mommy anymore, And so I really learned to read. By the time I go to first grade, and in the first week, they give us these readers, C-Jip Run, Jane Run. I'm going to go home and read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, okay? That was the kind of stuff. The funny story there is that one time reading a duck comic to me, she came to a word she didn't know what it was. And the word was bouillabaisse. And she had to look it up. And so the word that mommy had to look up became my favorite word. I love that word. And so in first grade, after about a week, my teacher, Miss Grozier, I will never forget. She wanted to have this little. She had some kind of contest worked out where you had to have a word, and if other people could spell your word and you couldn't spell theirs, there were points, and somebody wins eventually. And the other kids in front of me, the first couple, their words were like cat, dog, door, things like that. They come to me, I say, bouillabaisse. Teacher says, you don't even know what that is. I said, it's fish soup. And she says, you can't spell that. I said, yes, I can. And so she calls me up to her desk and she says, write it. And so, you know, I wrote bouillabaisse. She had to look it up. Oh, was I happy. I was so happy. And so, needless to say, no one else could spell bouillabaisse. And so I got the gold star. And was banned from further competition. I was so disappointed. I was already with teletype and invulnerable and all these other words. I used to tell that story. I told her enough times that even I started doubting that it was true. I said, maybe I made that up. Did that really happen? But one time I was telling the story, and sitting next to me was Walt Simonson. And so I'm telling the story. So in this Donald Duck comic book, my mother came across this word, bouillabaisse. Walt says, no. It was Uncle Scrooge. What? He said it was Uncle Scrooge. Uncle Scrooge sends Donald and the nephews to Africa. And as soon as he said Africa, it came back. And in unison, we said, to find the secret recipe for crocodile bouillabaisse. And I got to tell Carl Bartz that story at his 90th birthday party. He was very much amused.
See, aren't you glad I took a second there for that? Just in front of those. Who's got the next question? Yes, sir. Yeah, you were out there with a jacket.
Yeah, I was wondering, this is kind of two-pronged. What's your favorite Legion story that you've written and then written by someone else?
Favorite Legion story that I wrote and favorite Legion story written by somebody else. It's, I don't know, hard to pick. I get better as I went along, so it'd probably be one of the ones toward the end. I almost wrote the first drug story in comics. I really liked it the way I wrote it, but it was rejected by the Comics Code. I did everything I could to make it past the Comics Code. It wasn't like pills or injections. It was the lotus fruit, and other stuff like that. And at the end of it, I had the Legionnaire Ultra Boy who became addicted to this stuff have to go through rehab. And the Comics Code rejected it. And so Mort said, you have to change the ending. This is what I need you to do. And so it became a dumb story. It was really dumb. Because at the end, he overcomes it by himself and he's magically okay and he punches the bad guy and he gets away. And he leaves. And I thought, that wouldn't happen. That's wrong, P.S., 2 months later, Stan did the Spider-Man drug story. Mine would have come out 2 months earlier. And he did his drug story, and again, rejected by the code. And he was enough of an authority at Marvel at that time to decide we're going to run without the code. And they did. And in older days, that book the printer wouldn't have printed it without a code stamp. The distributors wouldn't have carried it. The retailers would have rejected it. But by late in the 60s, I guess people had gotten over that a little bit. And so it ran unopposed. And so I actually would have been first. But I didn't have clout and Stan did. So
Thank you.
that was my favorite story until they ruined it.
You had a question?
I'll come back and I got forgot.
Okay, that's okay. Who's next? There you go.
What made you want to write comics?
Desperate need for money. Your family needs money, and you're 12, going on 13. They're not going to hire you in a factory. Delivering papers, I did that, but it's a couple bucks a week. That's not going to make a difference. And so I kept trying to think, what can I do? What can I do? And like I said, I discovered these Marvel comics that were really good, And I loved comics. I loved comics. And it occurred to me, somebody gets paid for doing this. Somebody must get paid. They probably get paid pretty well. And so that's why I just decided I'm going to write a story, send it in, see if I can sell it. And I knew, like I said, I studied for a while just to make sure, figure out what to do and what not to do. Like, I thought the Legion Clubhouse was stupid. It's like a rocket stuck upside down on the ground. And the way John Fort used to draw it was about the size of a phone booth, you know. So I didn't like that, but I figured out if I change that in the first submission, they won't buy it. You know, they don't make sudden moves like that. They don't do that. So I kept the old one, made it bigger. They didn't seem to mind. But I really tried to learn, you know, don't kill Aunt May on your first issue. And things like that. And so, and it worked, you know, and I got going and helped support my family for 5 years doing that work for DC. So, but that was it. It was, I mean, I loved comics, and I might have, you know, sent in, most people send a submission, it's for fun. They're doing it for fun. I might have done that if I didn't have need to sell something, but I did. And so I really poured the effort, you know.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I love the Korvac saga with
Oh,
the
yeah.
Avengers in the late 70s. It was so elegantly written. What went through your mind when you were creating that?
I wanted the Avengers to have, you know, a story number one where they weren't hanging around the mansion and get attacked. I wanted them to go out and avenge something, you know. I thought I wanted to do something big because the Avengers should be, I mean, they're the Earth's mightiest heroes. You need to have something big to challenge them. And one of the main reasons was I was working with George Perez at the time. And George Perez, he loved to draw lots of characters. And so we were talking, and he said, let's do a story with lots of characters. I said, all right, I think I can arrange that. And so, yeah, of course, the Avengers, I put the Guardians of the Galaxy in there, and a couple other characters, and tried to come up with a villain worthy of all of these people. And then George, irrepressible George Perez, he'd always do everything I wanted, and he would make it wonderful, and he would add little thoughts here and there. And every once in a while, he'd throw me a curveball. I think in the first issue, he put in the two-gun kid. I didn't ask for the two-gun kid. Now I've got to explain why the two-gun kid is hanging out with Hawkeye or something. Okay, so I figured that out. And, but a lot of it was to humor George. You know, just wanted to draw lots of characters. So the trouble with George, he didn't stick with it all the way through because DC was always trying to get him over there. They were always, they did that all the time. They were always trying to steal artists from us. And we weren't too worried about it because we had a bunch of good people who were very good at finding talent and knowing if somebody was good or going to be good. And so if they did steal somebody, we didn't get more. They could, I don't know why, but they had trouble like picking people who could do it. In fact, if I gave a guy a 5-page tryout story, they'd offer him a contract. This actually happened several times. You know, like offer somebody a 5-page tryout story, and then they went to check DC, see what else they could get. And when they found out that I liked them, they wanted to hire the guy. So, you know, and they were always after Frank Miller, and they eventually got him to come over there and do something. We weren't worried, and it just, you know, George, they were after George. They always were after George. And finally, they hit the right thing. They offered him the Justice League. George wrote me a 3-page letter of apology, saying he hated to leave. I mean, yes, this guy's in the office all the time. He can say it in person, but he wanted to write it down. He wrote me a 3-page, I still have a letter. He wrote me a 3-page apology letter saying that this was his childhood dream, was drawing the Justice League. And hard to argue with that, you know, follow your heart, you know. But we remained friends, and it was all fine. And he did a couple of Justice Leagues, and then I think started on the Teen Titans, and that worked out really well. So for them, for him, for Marv, that was a happy. And we didn't mind if DC succeeded because this whole industry was dying. We were trying to turn it around, and at first, we were the only ones trying to turn it around. And then DC starts fighting back. They're not going to take this line down, And doing things like Watchmen and the Getting George over there. So it was good. It was good for the whole business. And the direct market was starting. We were doing better stuff, which helped the direct market stores. The more direct market stores were, the better we did. The rising tide lifted all the boats. And then also the direct market, us people, created a venue for things like ElfQuest and Cerebus and Distant Soil, Turtles. So it was it got good for all for a while. We were happy about that.
All right, next question. Yes.
Well, I heard that the first draft for the Transformers, you didn't like a lot of the names, and you personally came up with a lot of the names. Is that true? And could you tell us about
it? He said that the first draft of the Transformers that was done, and I didn't like the names, and then I did it myself and changed the names. Something like that. What happened was, after G.I. Joe, I did the foundation, a little bit of the foundation for G.I. Joe. Larry Hama did almost everything else. So I did this much, he did that much. But then we started getting every time something would work, the upstairs people who had never opened a comic book said, well, let's just do that. Star Wars was a hit. Now they wanted to do every movie. I said, no, it has to be a super movie, I successfully fended some off, but, we ended up doing, Krull and stuff. I don't know. Anyway, I had some center jammed down my throat. It was the same with the toys. We did such a huge success with G.I. Joe. The next thing I know, all the licensing people said, well, let's do this. Let's do Crystar. Let's do US-1. I successfully fended off some, but not all. Because I really ran the publishing, and the only guy who could overrule me was the president of the company. So I could turn the stuff down if I wanted. But if the licensing people went to him and talked him into it, then he told me to do it, well, what am I going to do? All right, back to Transformers. After we started doing these developments, I wrote the budget. I created a budget for them, and I decided these things should pay pretty well, And so I didn't have all the money in the world, but I decided I made it paid, a bunch of money for essentially, coming up with ideas and writing the equivalent of a Marvel plot. So it was a really good deal. And I'd given a couple other guys things to work on. Sometimes I had to fix them, sometimes not. But this one, it was kind of Denny O'Neil's turn. He was a great writer, and B, he liked to make money. And so I offered it to him. Denny, I didn't really realize this, but Denny just didn't like toys. He hated toys. And he just, somehow he thought it was dignified to write Daredevil or Batman, but writing Transformers was, I don't know. But anyway, so I gave him the assignment, he was happy to have it. And then after a day or so, he comes in my office, he says, I have no idea what to do. And I said, all right, so I sat him down, and I started giving him things, I said, how about this? Why don't we do it this way? Fed him his lines a little bit. And because I do toys pretty well. And so he wrote a treatment for the foundation story of Transformers. And it wasn't good. I mean, the parts that I told him to do, I thought some of those were all right, but it wasn't good. And so I paid Denny, for the effort, but now my budget is gone, so I can't pay anybody else. So I have to do it myself. So I did. And I did the foundation part, Cybertron, the war between the robots, the flight to Earth, Earth having all the resources and therefore was a prize to be fought over. the wikis, the relationship between the young son and the robots, and also the father, and why did they turn into cars? That was like the big question. Why did these robots turn into cars? And my answer to that was, and I hope it works, but my answer was, had no experience with organic life forms. And there's all kinds of organic life forms crawling around on this planet, but they didn't know that we were anything special. What looked like the dominant life form was cars. And so at first they made themselves look like cars, and then when they figured it out, turning into cars was working for them, so they kept doing it. That was the part I did. I didn't invent any names, zero. Denny actually contributed one name. He was the one who came up with the name Optimus Prime, and that survived his treatment and became, the standard. I turned this over to Bob, and I didn't have any of the characters' name. The leader was Optimus Prime, but other than that, I didn't have any of these characters named or really developed at all. And so Bob Budiansky, great guy, brilliant artist, writer, editor, great. And the trouble is, Hasbro needed this in kind of a rush to make some window. And so I told Bob, I asked him if he'd do it. He was interested. I said, you have to write the plot for the first issue over the weekend. It's like Friday, late afternoon. And he's, okay. To write the plot for the first issue, he was going to have to think through all of the characters who are in it, come up with names for them, come up with personalities, codify their powers, and, oh, by the way, write a story, which he did. The first story was a little bit dictated to us by Hasbro. It was kind of a toy catalog, really. But, Bob did the best he could with it, and it was fine. But after that, he just kept going, creating names for characters, their personalities, their backgrounds. Did a great job. And so all the names and stuff, but he said, we're going to call this Black and Yellow on Bumblebee. All right. So it's again, it's just like Larry. I give him this much, he does everything else. Created characters like Circuit Breaker and other ones. Anyway.
Thank you. All right. Who has the next question? We got anybody over here? Yeah, go ahead.
So were you doing Transformers when you guys had the dispute with like Robotech and Macross?
We had a dispute.
There was like some legal dispute between one of whoever was doing the comics at the time.
I don't recall any of that.
If I remember the story correctly, and I'm just basing this on what the Secret Galaxy YouTube channel had to say on the matter, that was more a dispute between the toy companies because.
Oh yeah, that's toy companies. Yeah.
Okay.
No, it didn't involve us.
And rather than involving the comics or the cartoon.
One thing about the comics is secret origin that nobody knows is that there was a company called Knickerbocker Toys, and they mostly did plush toys, stuffed animals and things. And I guess that business wasn't working out real well for them, and they decided to get into what made the most money, which was boys' toys. So they licensed from Japan this technology where cars turned into robots. And robots turned into cars. There were other things too. They had a cube that turned into a robot, and a sphere that turned into a robot, and other things like that. And this property was called the Mysterians. And they saw what we did with G.I. Joe, and they thought, well, Marvel's in bed with Hasbro, can't talk to them. So they went to DC Comics, and DC Comics charged them a fortune and did a toy development, did a comic book development based on these toys. I'm telling you, it was the most wrong-headed thing I ever saw. How did I see it? Well, in desperation, the Knickerbocker people came to us and were pleased to find out that no, we didn't have an exclusive with Hasbro or anything. And so they showed me what DC had done, and it was bad. I mean, it was a comic, obviously going to get some younger readers for this. And they had swear words and kind of sexual innuendo and skimpy costumes and stuff. I said, that's not good. They said, well, can you do something better? I said, yeah, we can do something better in our sleep. And so I wrote that treatment. And they he said, comic books, and we're going to try to find animation. I said, well, we have our animation studio. Anyway, that was rolling along, and then out of the blue, Hasbro buys Knickerbocker. They bought it, and they squelched that toy because they didn't want any competition with. They had the Transformers technology, and they didn't want somebody else to have cars turning into robots. Easy thing to do, buy the company. So they did, they squelched that, and then a Hasbro executive comes to me as a shopping bag, takes the shopping bag, out comes the car, puts it on my desk. I said, well, that's cool. He said, watch this, flip, 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 it's a robot, flip, 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 it's a car. Oh, So I didn't tell him about the Knickerbocker thing. And he said, can you give us the story here? I mean, can you explain this? Why is it turned into a robot? I said, yeah, and like I told you, I went through this false start with Denny, and then I did it, but I did it completely different than Mysterious. Nothing like Mysterious, all different. And so Hasbro liked what I did, and away we went. But people don't know about the Mysterians or Knickerbocker usually.
All right, next question. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I want to ask this question for my friend who couldn't be here today. Loves Graviton. How'd you come up with the inspiration for Graviton?
Well, it was one of the early issues I did. He said, how did I come up with the inspiration for the villain Graviton? And back in those days, comic book creators, we all hung out together. We played poker on Friday nights. We played volleyball in the park, and people got along. And because we were together a lot, we could go over to the Brew Burger, grab some dinner, whatever. Inevitably, we would talk and shop, and we'd help each other. Somebody was stuck for a story, sitting around with me, Roger Stern, and Walt Simonson. We'd help them. We'd say, well, how about this? Get them started. So one of those times, I just started writing the Avengers, and I wanted to have this villain with the gravity powers, because I didn't see a lot of that, at least at Marvel. And so I was telling the story to the group that was there, and they liked it. And somebody said, well, what's the character's name? And I said, I don't have that figured out yet. And Len Wein hardly looks up and he says, Graviton. Oh, yeah, of course. So Len Wein, just off the top of his head, came up with that. But we always did that. Everybody always, pitched in and helped each other. But it was great. That was a nice contribution. Thank you, Len.
All right, next question. Or you? Yes, you, and then you. Pat second, then the other guy first. Go ahead, sir.
I heard you just a little while ago reference ElfQuest.
Yeah.
And that was one of my favorites as a teenager.
Yeah.
I know that there was a thing where ElfQuest came to Marvel. What's your Richard and Wendy Pini? What's your comment on ElfQuest?
Well, I met Richard and Wendy early on. Wendy used to do a skit at conventions where she played Red Sonja and artist Frank. I'll think of it. Frank Thorne. Thank you. He would play the wizard, and they did this little skit and stuff. And so I got to know these people, and as I said, a venue opened up for them, and they started publishing ElfQuest, and ElfQuest was one of the really good ones, And we were all fans of ElfQuest. We get all the books, they came in and passed them around and stuff. At some point along the way, I guess Richard and Wendy talked to Archie Goodwin, because at that point we had the creator online, Epic, where the creators had all the rights, and the only thing that would return to them when we stopped publishing would be the publishing rights. So they were intrigued by that. Besides, we paid very well, and so they ended up doing some stuff, I think, with Epic Comics. I don't know if it did Cerebus too, maybe. I'm not sure. But we were going to, I know that. But I don't know whether it actually happened. Can't remember.
Okay, you in the hat, you're the yellow hat, you got your.
Oh, right, sorry.
That's okay. We're all here. How are you?
So I was just gonna ask about Venom, and did you like the Venom movies that they made?
All right. Venom came about because I created the black costume. I did the origin of that, and kept the origin deliberately mysterious. Spider-Man thinks he's going to a costume machine. He's going to some other machine, and this thing coats him, and it reads his mind, and it replicates the costume that he was thinking about, which he'd seen on the new Spider-Woman, and that's why it looked like it looked, because it was on his mind, and it read his mind. And it did all the things the black costume did. Okay, so when I told the writers and editors of Spider-Man, I said, Secret Wars happens between the December issues and the January issues of that year. And it's the story of what happened in the middle there. And so Spider-Man was going to go to Secret Wars wearing his red and blue and come back in a black. And so the writers and whoever the editor was, they said, well, what do you want us to do with it? And I said, well, it's obviously alive. It reads his mind. It couldn't have been dangerous when he got it because he would have sensed that. So do anything you want. Take it from there. And they went and thought for a while, and they came back and said, we're going to make it a symbiote. That's not the most original idea I ever heard. Oh, man, isn't that the first thing most people would think of? But I told them, do anything you want. So I did not renege. I said, okay, it's a symbiote, go. And so they did. But the thing was, even not the cleverest idea I ever heard, they knocked it out of the park. It was great. People loved it. The sales are going up. It was such a hit that the president of Marvel, who never opened a comic book in his life and had no idea what black costume meant, no clue. And all he knew, he could read a balance sheet, he could read sales figures, couldn't read a comic to save his life. But he saw that something called the black costume, and he saw pictures of it, he knew what it was just generating tremendous revenues because licensees all around the world who already had the red and blue costume, they wanted the black one too. It doubled their business by accident, So that was a real big hit. And remember, Marvel's a little company. We weren't like DC, part of Warner, where DC could screw up for years and be lost in the rounding. Marvel, we needed to make money. We needed to earn our keep. So anyway, he was so impressed with the results that the black costume was bringing in licensing and comic sales and everything like that. He decreed that he wanted the business cards changed from red and blue Spider-Man to the black Spider-Man. Business cards, letterhead, and envelopes. And he kept it that way for 2 years. So for 2 years, your Marvel business card had black suit Spider-Man. And your stationery and your envelopes. And that was how big a hit it was. This guy said, all right, we got to do something with this. Let's put it on the business cards. So big hit. I really didn't have too much to do except approve of things that were done afterwards, and they kept developing the symbiote as an independent creature, and I thought that was good. And then I'd left already, but David Michelinie and Todd McFarlane were the ones that turned it into Venom, which if I'd been there, I would have approved of that. I would have thought that was a good idea. And now it's taken on a life of its own. There's Mary Jane Venom, and there's all right, and then there's anti-Venom, and there's anyways, big hit, and I was happy to be a part of it. Once again, I built a little foundation. Other people take it there. So I had good people. God, I had the best people in the world. You walk down the hallway. The first door you come to is John Romita Sr. Yeah, that's my art guy. He works for me. I'm 26. He's a Grandmaster Hall of Fame, but he works for me. He was doing what he wanted to do. But the thing is, that your first guy is the Grandmaster Hall of Fame guy. Then there's Louise. And there's Larry Hama, Louis Sampson, Larry Hama, Archie Goodwin, and then Bob Budiansky, Carl Potts, and Jim Selleck. I mean, this is Murderer's Row, you know, and this is just the editorial staff. And then you think of all the great artists and writers that we had. You can't win with that team. Fire that coach. Yeah. But anyway, it was a good time, and we had good people, and we poured our hearts into it, and did the best we could.
Jim, there was a little bit part of that. I know you and I have talked about this before, but he was asking, what did you think about the movies?
Oh, movies! I didn't see them.
I'm sorry, I knew where that was going, but I thought it'd be funnier when he said it. All right, you and then you. Go ahead.
I was just kind of curious. You mentioned earlier what it was like working under the comics code, because it did its bit to save comics to keep going, but did it ever start feeling so restrictive on the potential of what you wanted to do?
The comics code. Well, first of all, you're right. I mean, basically, the Estes Kefauver hearings, the Senate hearings, that were driven by the Frederick W. Wortham, or Frederick something Wortham, book called Seduction of the Innocent, where he was blaming all juvenile delinquency on comic books. Those hearings did not go well. They were not going well. When Bill Gaines was explaining that a hand holding a severed head wasn't gory, and they said, what would make it gory? He said, well, maybe if it was dripping blood, you know. I mean, we're dead. So rather than be regulated by the government, the industry chose to self-regulate. And the comics code, for a while, the comics code was strong. I mean, it used to be every page of every comic book had to have the code stamp on the back, or the printer wouldn't print it, and the distributor wouldn't distribute it, and so forth. And that worked out. Now, but if you ever read the comics code, which was written, I think, in 1957, it's chaotic. It's kind of dumb, you know. I mean, anyway. And so when I was working in the '60s for DC, and I had like all these code restrictions explained to me, I was like, you know, I suddenly understood why you never saw in a comic book bullets bounce off of Superman's chest. You couldn't do any action that might be imitated by a kid and cause harm. They had a constant battle about Superman flying. The kids might jump off roofs or something, you know, but they won that one.